In the gentle folds of the English countryside, where the hills of Devon rolled like the soft undulations of an ancient quilt, stood Harrington Manor, a grand estate, whispering secrets of bygone eras. But on this crisp autumn afternoon in 1952, beneath the polished facade of a family gathering to unveil a priceless emerald heirloom, an undercurrent of unease stirred. Old grievances, hidden debts, and treacherous ties poised to unleash a shocking murder that only the unassuming Miss Jane Marple could unravel. Chapter 1. The setup. In the gentle folds of the English countryside, where the hills of Devon rolled like the soft undulations of an ancient quilt, stood Harrington Manor. It was one of those grand old estates that seemed to have grown out of the earth itself, its ivy-clad walls whispering secrets of bygone eras. The manor had been in the Harrington family for generations, a bastion of quiet dignity amid the encroaching modernity of the post-war world. Yet, on this crisp autumn afternoon in 1952, as the leaves turned to shades of russet and gold, an undercurrent of unease stirred beneath the surface of its polished facade. Lady Eleanor Harrington, the mistress of the house, moved through the drawing-room with the practiced grace of one accustomed to command. At 55, she retained the sharp beauty of her youth, her dark hair streaked with silver and pulled into an elegant chignon. Her eyes, a piercing blue, surveyed the room with a mixture of satisfaction and subtle anxiety. The occasion was a family gathering, a weekend retreat to celebrate the unveiling of the Harrington Emerald, a priceless heirloom that had been in the family since the days of Queen Victoria. The necklace, with its central stone the size of a pigeon's egg and flanked by diamonds that sparkled like captured stars, was more than a jewel. It was a symbol of the family's enduring legacy, or so Lady Eleanor liked to believe. The guests had begun to arrive that morning, each carriage or motor car crunching up the gravel drive with a sense of inevitability. First came Sir Reginald Harrington himself, the patriarch, a robust man of 60 with a moustache that bristled like a hedgehog and a voice that boomed across the halls. He had spent the week in London on business matters, something to do with investments in the colonies, or so he claimed, and now returned with the emerald safely ensconced in a velvet-lined case. "Eleanor, my dear," he had said upon entering, planting a perfunctory kiss on her cheek, "I've brought the family treasure back from the vaults. Let us hope this weekend mends some fences, eh?" Lady Eleanor had smiled thinly. Mending fences was precisely what she hoped for, though she doubted the emerald's luster could polish away the tarnish of old grievances. The Harringtons were a family, bound by blood, but divided by ambition, envy, and unspoken resentments. Sir Reginald's will, rumoured to favour certain heirs over others, hung over them like a storm cloud. Among the first to arrive was their son, Geoffrey Harrington, a lanky fellow of 32 with a perpetual air of dissatisfaction. He worked in the city as a stockbroker, though his successes were few and his debts, Lady Eleanor suspected, many. Geoffrey had brought his wife, Muriel, a pretty but nervous young woman whose wide eyes betrayed a constant fear of saying the wrong thing. "Mother," Geoffrey greeted Lady Eleanor with a stiff embrace. "Father's emerald show, quite the spectacle, isn't it? One wonders what all the fuss is about. A bit of green glass." "It's far more than that, Geoffrey," Lady Eleanor replied coolly, her tone laced with reproof. "It's our heritage. Do try to show some enthusiasm." Muriel, clutching her handbag as if it were a shield, murmured, "It's lovely to be here, Lady Eleanor. The manor looks splendid." Next came Victoria Harrington, Sir Reginald's niece, a striking woman of 28, with flame-red hair and a laugh that could fill a room or shatter glass, depending on one's mood. Victoria had recently returned from Paris, where she pursued a career in fashion design, though whispers suggested her talents lay more in charming wealthy patrons than in sketching gowns. She arrived alone, her luggage piled high, and immediately set about charming the servants. "Aunt Eleanor, darling," she cooed, air-kissing both cheeks. "How positively medieval this place feels after the boulevards of Paris. And Uncle Reggie, with his emerald shawl. We all be dripping in jewels by dinner." Lady Eleanor forced a smile. Victoria's vivacity was a double-edged sword. It enlivened the dullest gathering, but often masked a sharper intent. There had been that unfortunate business last year, when Victoria had borrowed money from Sir Reginald and failed to repay it promptly. Debts, it seemed, ran in the family. The circle was completed by Colonel Arthur Blakely, a retired military man, an old friend of Sir Reginald's from their days in India. At 65, the colonel was a portly figure with a ruddy complexion and a fondness for brandy. He arrived with his valet, a quiet young man named Thomas, who seemed perpetually in the shadows. "Harrington, old chap," the colonel bellowed upon entering the hall, clapping Sir Reginald on the back. "Heard about your emerald escapade. Capital idea, bringing the family together. Nothing like a bit of sparkle to chase away the blues." Sir Reginald chuckled, though his eyes flickered with something unspoken. The colonel had invested in one of Sir Reginald's ventures years ago, a rubber plantation that had soured amid political unrest. Reparations had been promised but never fully delivered. Still, old friendships endured all, so they pretended. As the afternoon wore on, the group assembled in the drawing-room for tea. The room was a testament to Victorian opulence. Heavy damask curtains framed tall windows overlooking the manicured gardens, where the last roses of summer clung defiantly to their stems. A fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows on the portraits of stern Harrington ancestors. Silver trays bore scones, clotted cream, and delicate sandwiches, served by the housemaid Agnes, a sturdy woman in her 40s who had been with the family for 2 decades. Agnes moved with quiet efficiency, her face a mask of impassive loyalty, though Lady Eleanor noted the slight tremor in her hands as she poured the tea. Conversation flowed in polite rivulets, skirting the deeper currents beneath. Sir Reginald held court from his armchair, regaling them with tales of the emerald's history. "It was my great-grandfather who acquired it in India, you know, said to have been part of a Maharaja's treasure. Cursed, some say, but poppycock, of course. It's brought nothing but good fortune to the Harringtons." Geoffrey snorted softly, earning a sharp glance from his father. "Good fortune? For whom, exactly?" "The will's still a mystery, father. One hopes the emerald factors into it." Sir Red mustache twitched. "All in good time, my boy. Patience is a virtue." Victoria leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "Oh, uncle, do let us see it now. Don't tease us until dinner." "In due course, my dear Sir Reginald," replied, though his tone held a note of indulgence. He glanced at the colonel, who nodded approvingly while sipping his tea laced, no doubt, with a dash of something stronger from his flask. Muriel, ever the peacemaker, ventured, "The gardens are lovely this time of year. Perhaps a stroll after tea, a splendid idea." Lady Eleanor agreed, grateful for the diversion. But as they rose, a subtle tension lingered. Geoffrey's fingers drummed restlessly on his knee. Victoria's smile seemed a fraction too bright, and the colonel's gaze darted occasionally to the locked safe in the study, visible through the open door, where the emerald awaited its reveal. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and woods. The group wandered the paths in pairs, Sir Reginald and the colonel discussing old campaigns, Geoffrey and Muriel trailing behind in murmured argument, Victoria flitting like a butterfly, and Lady Eleanor walking alone, her thoughts turning inward. She had orchestrated this gathering not merely for celebration, but for reconciliation. Sir Reginald's health had been faltering a week hard. The doctor said the family's fractures needed mending before it was too late. Yet, as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lawn, Lady Eleanor couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. It was as if the manor itself held its breath, waiting for the inevitable crack in the veneer of civility. Little did she know that by nightfall, the emerald's enigma would entwine with something far darker, a web of treacherous ties and hidden daggers, poised to strike. In the village of St. Mary Mead, some miles away, Miss Jane Marple sat in her cosy cottage, knitting an intricate scarf while gazing out at her own garden. She had no inkling yet of the events unfolding at Harrington Manor, though a distant relative, Dolly Bantry, had mentioned in passing a weekend invitation she had declined. "Too much family drama for my taste," Dolly had said, over tea the previous week. Miss Marple had smiled faintly, her blue eyes twinkling with that peculiar insight born of long observation. "Family gatherings can be so revealing, my dear. One never knows what might surface." For now, however, Miss Marple contented herself with the quiet rhythms of village life, unaware that fate or perhaps an urgent telegram would soon draw her into the heart of the storm. As evening fell over Harrington Manor, the guests retired to dress for dinner. Lamps were lit, casting a warm glow that belied the chill settling in. Sir Reginald, in his study, unlocked the safe one final time to admire the emerald. Its green fire seemed to pulse with a life of its own. "Tonight," he murmured to himself, "we lay old ghosts to rest." But ghosts, as the Harringtons would soon discover, have a way of refusing to stay buried. Chapter 2. The crime. The dining room of Harrington Manor gleamed with the understated elegance of a bygone era. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across the long mahogany table, set with fine-boned china and silver, that bore the Harrington crest. The air was heavy with the scent of roast pheasant and rosemary, though the atmosphere among the diners was far less savory. It was 8:30 on that fateful autumn evening, and the Harrington emerald, now the centerpiece of the gathering, lay displayed on a velvet cushion in an open case at the head of the table, where Sir Reginald presided with a mixture of pride and wariness. Lady Eleanor, seated to his right, wore a sapphire blue gown that complemented her composed demeanor, though her fingers toyed restlessly with the stem of her wineglass. Geoffrey, opposite her, slouched slightly, his bow tie askew, while Muriel beside him kept her eyes fixed on her plate, as if willing herself invisible. Victoria, radiant in emerald green silk that seemed chosen to echo the jewel itself, laughed too loudly at a remark from Colonel Blakeley, who sat at the table's far end, his face flushed from a second helping of claret. The valet Thomas stood discreetly by the sideboard, ready to serve, while Agnes, the housemaid, moved silently, clearing plates with her usual efficiency. Sir Reginald raised his glass, his voice resonant as he addressed the group. "To the Harrington emerald," he declared, "a symbol of our family's strength and unity. May it remind us of what binds us, despite our differences." The toast was met with murmurs of assent, though Geoffrey's was notably half-hearted. "Unity," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Muriel to nudge him sharply. Victoria's smile was all teeth, and the Colonel's hearty "hear, hear" seemed to mask a flicker of unease. Dinner progressed through its courses, conversation ebbing and flowing like a tide. Sir Reginald spoke of the emerald's history, its journey from an Indian palace to a London vault, its rumoured curse dismissed with a chuckle. Lady Eleanor steered the talk to safer topics: the weather, the upcoming village fete, the new vicar at St. Mary's. Yet beneath the civility, tensions simmered. Geoffrey's barbed comments about inheritance drew a sharp glance from his father. Victoria's flirtatious banter with the Colonel raised Lady Eleanor's eyebrow, and Muriel, attempting to mediate, only seemed to irritate her husband further. At precisely 9:15, as Agnes served the dessert, a delicate lemon syllabub, Sir Reginald rose, holding the emerald's case aloft. "I propose a toast to the future," he said, his voice steady but his eyes scanning the room. "Tomorrow, I shall meet with my solicitor to finalize certain matters. The emerald will play its part in ensuring our legacy endures." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling like dust. Geoffrey's fork clattered against his plate. Victoria's smile faltered. The Colonel coughed into his napkin. Lady Eleanor's hand stilled on her glass, her expression unreadable. "Reginald," she said softly, "perhaps we might save such announcements for a less public moment." "Nonsense, Eleanor," he replied, waving a hand. "The family deserves to know. Transparency, my dear, that's the ticket." Before anyone could respond, a sharp cry rang out from the hallway. It was Agnes, her face ashen as she stumbled into the room, clutching the doorframe. "Sir Reginald, the studio. Heavens, come quickly." The party froze, then surged to their feet as one. Sir Reginald, still clutching the emerald's case, led the charge, his face a mask of alarm. The others followed, their footsteps echoing on the polished oak floor as they hurried down the corridor to the study. The heavy door stood ajar, revealing a scene of quiet devastation. The safe, tucked behind a portrait of Sir Reginald's grandfather, hung open, its contents untouched, save for one glaring absence. A small silver-handled dagger, an antique from Sir Reginald's days in India, was missing from its display on the desk. The room was otherwise undisturbed, no papers scattered, no furniture overturned, but the air felt charged, as if the very walls held their breath. "Where's the dagger?" Sir Reginald demanded, his voice sharp. He set the emerald's case on the desk, his hands trembling slightly. "Agnes, what's this about?" I don't know, sir," Agnes stammered, wringing her hands. "I came to tidy the study after serving dessert, and I saw the safe open and the dagger gone. I swear it was there when I dusted this afternoon." Geoffrey pushed forward, his eyes narrowing. "Father, you locked the safe after showing us the emerald this afternoon, didn't you?" "Of course I did," Sir Reginald snapped. "The key's in my pocket." He patted his waistcoat, then froze, his face draining of color. It's gone. Gasp rippled through the group. Lady Eleanor stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. Reginald, are you certain? Check again. He fumbled through his pockets, his moustache quivering. It's not here. I swear I had it at tea. The colonel, peering over Sir Reginald's shoulder, muttered, damned odd, that a locked safe, a missing key, and now a dagger vanished. Smells like trouble. Victoria clutched her necklace, her voice high. Uncle, what does it mean? Is someone trying to steal the emerald? Don't be absurd. Geoffrey scoffed, though his eyes darted to the safe. The emerald's right there. But a dagger, that's not for cutting cake. Muriel, pale as the syllabub, whispered, could it be a prank? One of the staff, perhaps. Agnes bristled. I've been with this family 20 years, Mrs. Harrington. I'd sooner cut off my own hand than touch Sir Reginald's things. Enough, Lady Eleanor said, her tone slicing through the rising panic. We'll search the house. No one leaves until that dagger is found. Thomas, fetch the other servants. Colonel, will you assist? The colonel nodded, his military bearing reasserting itself. Right, let's be methodical. Check every room, every corner. The search began, the group dispersing through the manor's labyrinthine halls. Lamps flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to twist with secrets. Sir Reginald remained in the study, guarding the emerald, his face etched with worry. Lady Eleanor organized the effort with the precision of a general, though her eyes lingered on each family member, searching for a telltale sign of guilt. By 10:30, the search had yielded nothing. The dagger, with its ornate silver handle and razor-sharp blade, was nowhere to be found. The household reconvened in the drawing-room, tension thick as fog. Sir Reginald, now seated with a brandy in hand, looked older than his 60 years. This is intolerable, he muttered. That dagger was a gift from a Raja, irreplaceable, more irreplaceable than the emerald. Victoria asked, her tone teasing but her eyes sharp. Don't be flippant, Victoria, Lady Eleanor said. This is no time for games. As the clock struck 11, a scream shattered the uneasy silence. It came from the garden, high and piercing, unmistakable in its terror. The group rushed to the French doors, flinging them open to the chill night air. There, on the flagstone terrace, lay Sir Reginald's valet, Thomas, sprawled in a pool of moonlight and blood. The missing dagger protruded from his chest, its silver handle glinting cruelly. His eyes stared blankly at the stars, and his hand clutched a crumpled note, the ink smudged but legible. The emerald's curse claims its due. Lady Eleanor stifled a cry, her hand flying to her mouth. Geoffrey swore under his breath, while Muriel clung to his arm, sobbing. Victoria stood frozen, her face pale as porcelain. The colonel, kneeling beside the body, checked for a pulse, then shook his head grimly. He's gone. Dead, not 10 minutes, I'd wager. Agnes, hovering at the edge of the group, whispered, the curse. It's real. Nonsense, Lady Eleanor snapped, though her voice trembled. This is no curse. This is murder. The word hung in the air, cold and final. The Harringtons, bound by blood, and now by tragedy, stood in a silent circle around the body. The emerald, still safe in its case, seemed to mock them from the study, its green fire untouched by the blood now staining the manor's stones. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Jane Marple slept soundly, her knitting needles still on her lap, but the wheels of fate were turning, and by morning a telegram would summon her to Harrington Manor, place where treacherous ties and hidden daggers awaited her unerring gaze. Chapter 3. The arrival the morning after the tragedy at Harrington Manor dawned grey and sombre, as if the heavens themselves mourned the loss of young Thomas. A fine mist clung to the Devon hills, veiling the estate in a shroud of uncertainty. Inside the manor, the household stirred with the reluctant energy of those who had scarcely slept. Lady Eleanor Harrington, ever the pillar of composure, had risen at first light to oversee the grim necessities. The local constable, a sturdy fellow named Inspector Craddock, though no relation to the one Miss Marple knew from her village escapades, had arrived shortly after midnight. Summoned by a frantic telephone call, he had cordoned off the terrace, taken preliminary statements, and promised a thorough investigation come daylight, by 9 o'clock. The drawing-room had become a makeshift hub of activity. The emerald's case sat locked once more in the study safe, its key now under Inspector Craddock's watchful eye. The suspects, for that is what they had become, gathered in uneasy clusters. Geoffrey paced by the window, his face drawn and shadowed by stubble, while Muriel sat nearby, twisting a handkerchief in her lap. Victoria, her vivacity dimmed, sipped tea with trembling hands, and Colonel Blakely, nursing a headache from the previous night's excesses, stared into the fire as if seeking answers in its embers. Agnes moved about quietly, serving breakfast that went largely untouched, her eyes red-rimmed from weeping. Inspector Craddock, a man of middle years with a nonsense mustache and a notebook perpetually at the ready, addressed the group. "Now, let's go over this again. Thomas was last seen by Agnes at approximately 10:15, when he was sent to fetch the other servants for the search. He didn't return, and his body was discovered at 11. The dagger was taken from the study, sometime between dinner and the discovery of the open safe at 9:15. Alibis, if you please." Geoffrey stopped pacing. "I was in the library during the search, alone. Muriel was with me part of the time, but she stepped out to check the conservatory." Muriel nodded faintly. "Yes, that's right. I was gone perhaps 5 minutes. Victoria spoke up, her voice steadier than her appearance suggested. "I searched the upstairs bedrooms with Aunt Eleanor. We were together the whole time." Lady Eleanor confirmed this with a nod. "Indeed," and the Colonel Blakely cleared his throat. "I took the ground floor kitchens and such. Alone, I'm afraid. Old habits from the army. I work best solo." Agnes, hovering at the door, added, "I was in the pantry, sir, preparing for the night, alone as well." The inspector jotted notes, his brow furrowed, and Sir Reginald, the patriarch, seated in his armchair, looked haggard. "I remained in the study, guarding the emerald, didn't budge until the scream." Craddock tapped his pencil. "Convenient, that. The note about the Courtenay thoughts. A red herring," Geoffrey scoffed. "Thomas was probably killed for what he knew. He was father's valet, privy to all sorts of secrets." "What secrets?" Craddock pressed. Geoffrey hesitated, glancing at his father. "Family matters, debts, perhaps." Sir Reginald's face reddened. "Nonsense, boy. Thomas was loyal to a fault." The interrogation continued, alibis cross-checked against the timeline. The dagger had been wiped clean of fingerprints, Craddock reported after a preliminary examination. The note was written in block letters, ink from the study's desk. Motives swirled like the mist outside. Geoffrey's financial woes, Victoria's unpaid loans, the Colonel's old grudge over the failed investment, even Lady Eleanor's quiet resentment of her husband's domineering ways. Muriel seemed the outlier, but her nervousness raised suspicions. Agnes too had served the family long enough to harbour grudges, unspoken. As the clock struck 10, a knock echoed through the hall. Agnes answered, returning with a telegram. "For Lady Harrington, ma'am." Lady Eleanor opened it, her eyes widening. "It's from Dolly Bantry. She says ... she's sending help. An old friend from St. Mary, Mead, Miss Jane Marple, arriving by the noon train." Sir Reginald frowned. "Marple, never heard of her." "She's Dolly's acquaintance," Lady Eleanor explained, "known for sorting out puzzles. Dolly must have heard about our troubled news. Travels fast in these parts." Geoffrey snorted. "An old spinster. What good will she do? We need Scotland Yard, not some village busybody." "Geoffrey," Lady Eleanor admonished, "Dolly swears by it, says she's sharper than she appears." The group dispersed, murmurs of skepticism. Following, Inspector Craddock, overhearing, raised an eyebrow. "Amateurs, meddling. Not on my watch. But if she's coming, I'll question her too." Meanwhile, at the railway station in the nearby town of Ashford Cross, Miss Jane Marple alighted from the noon train with the unhurried grace of one accustomed to life's vagaries. She was a slight figure, dressed in sensible tweeds and a hat, adorned with a single feather, her knitting bag slung over one arm. Her blue eyes, keen as a bird's, took in the bustling platform, the porters with their trolleys, the vendors hawking newspapers headlining the Korean conflict and local scandals. A chauffeur from Harrington Manor awaited her, cap in hand. "Miss Marple, Lady Harrington sent me. Dreadful business at the manor." "Indeed," Miss Marple replied mildly, her voice soft but carrying an undercurrent of authority. "Poor Dolly telephoned me at dawn. Such a shock. A murder, you say?" The chauffeur nodded as he led her to the car. The valet, stabbed on the terrace, with Sir Reginald's own dagger. Talk of a curse on the family emerald. Miss Marple settled into the back seat, her fingers already busy with her knitting. Curses, my dear man, are often excuses for human frailty. Tell me, what sort of fellow was this Thomas? As the car wound through the misty lanes, the chauffeur named Jenkins recounted what he knew. Thomas had been with Sir Reginald for 5 years, quiet, efficient, but lately troubled. Whispers he was in debt. Miss gambled a bit. Miss nodded thoughtfully. Debt can drive one to desperate acts. And the family? Jenkins glanced in the mirror. Tense. Master Geoffrey's always short of cash. Miss Victoria's a wild one, and the Colonel's got a temper. Lady Eleanor's the steady sort, but even she, he trailed off, and Miss Marple did not press. Instead, she gazed out at the passing countryside, drawing parallels in her mind to St. Mary Mead. It reminds me of old Mrs. Edgeworth, she murmured, to herself. All smiles on the surface, but underneath, a nest of vipers. Upon arrival at Harrington Manor, Miss Marple was ushered into the drawing-room, where the family awaited. Lady Eleanor greeted her warmly, though strain etched her features. Miss Marple, how kind of you to come. Dolly speaks so highly of you. Not at all, my dear, Miss Marple said, accepting a chair by the fire. I'm merely an old woman with time on her hands. Now, tell me everything from the beginning. Inspector Craddock, standing by, eyed her dubiously. Miss Marple, is it I'm handling the official inquiry? Your observations are welcome, but of course, Inspector, Miss Marple interjected gently. I wouldn't dream of interfering. But sometimes, an outside eye sees what familiarity overlooks. As the afternoon unfolded, Miss Marple listened attentively. As the events were recounted, the dinner, the missing dagger, the search, the scream, she asked few questions, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. But her gaze missed nothing, the way Geoffrey avoided his father's eyes. Victoria's fidgeting with her bracelet, the Colonel's too casual grip on his walking stick, and the note. Miss Marple inquired at last, "May I see it?" Craddock produced it, encased in a protective envelope. Miss Marple examined it closely, noting the paper's quality-fine bond from the studiant, the deliberate block letters. "Curious," she said. "The ink smudges suggest haste, yet the wording is precise. The emerald's curse claims its due, almost theatrical." Sir Reginald harumphed. Theatrical indeed. Thomas must have stumbled upon the thief, or, Miss Marple suggested mildly, he was the intended victim all along. "Valets hear much. You know, like our postman in St. Mary Mead, always in the know." Muriel shivered. But who would want Thomas dead? He was harmless. Harmless people often know harmful secrets. Miss Marple replied, her eyes twinkling faintly. As tea was served, Miss Marple requested a tour of the manor. Lady Eleanor obliged, leading her through the halls. In the study, Miss Marple paused by the safe, noting its position behind the portrait. "Easily overlooked," she observed, "and the key lost during dinner." Sir Reginald, accompanying them, nodded. "I had it at tea. Must have slipped from my pocket." "Or been slipped," Miss Marple murmured. On the terrace, the bloodstain had been covered, but Miss Marple knelt spite her age to examine the flagstones. The body was here, facing the garden. The dagger struck from the front, suggesting trust, or surprise. Craddock, trailing behind, conceded, astute. Miss Marple, no signs of struggle. Returning indoors, Miss Marple conversed with Agnes in the kitchen. "You found the safe open, my dear?" Agnes nodded, polishing silver with vigor. "Yes, miss. Gave me a turn. Thomas, ... He was a good lad, owed me a bit from cards, but nothing serious." "Cards?" Miss Marple echoed. "Gambling, you mean?" "Just friendly games, miss. But Thomas had bigger debts elsewhere." Miss Marple filed this away, her mind weaving threads like her knitting. By evening, as the household prepared for another uneasy night, she retired to her guest room, reflecting on the day's observations. The arrival had been unexpected, but already, subtle inconsistencies nagged at her like Geoffrey's alibi. Fragile as Muriel's nerves, or Victoria's green gown, echoing the emerald perhaps too deliberately. Downstairs, Inspector Craddock confided to Lady Eleanor that old bird's sharper than she looks. "Indeed," Lady Eleanor replied. "One hopes she sees what we cannot." As darkness fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting in the lamplight. The enigma of the emerald and the dagger's deadly path was only beginning to unfold. Treacherous ties bound this family, and she, with her village wisdom, would untangle them thread by thread. Chapter 4. The questions begin. The following day at Harrington Manor brought a deceptive calm, the kind that follows a storm but precedes another. The mist had lifted, revealing a sky of pale blue, streaked with clouds like unraveling threads. Inside, the household moved with the subdued rhythm of grief and suspicion, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Inspector Craddock had established a temporary headquarters in the library, his constables combing the grounds for further evidence, while the family navigated the enforced confinement with varying degrees of grace. Miss Jane Marple, having taken a light breakfast in her room, a poached egg and toast, with tea brewed, just so descended to the drawing-room shortly after 9. She carried her knitting bag, its contents a comforting constant amid the turmoil. Lady Eleanor greeted her there, her face drawn but resolute. "Miss Marple, I trust you slept well. The inspector wishes to continue his inquiries, but I thought you might like to observe." "Observe, my dear," Miss Marple replied mildly, settling into an armchair by the window. "That is precisely what I do best. One learns so much from watching people go about their days. It reminds me of Mrs. Price in St. Mary Medalways, fussing with her curtains. But oh, the things she saw." Lady Eleanor managed a faint smile. "Then perhaps you might join me in speaking with the others. The inspector is methodical, but he lacks insight into human nature." Thus began Miss Marple's gentle probing, a series of conversations that seemed casual but were laced with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. She started with Agnes, the housemaid, whom she found in the kitchen polishing the silver with a vigor that suggested displacement of anxiety. "Good morning, Agnes," Miss Marple said, entering quietly. "Might I trouble you for a cup of tea, and perhaps a chat time? Sure you've seen much in your years here." Agnes paused, wiping her hands on her apron. "Tea, Miss, of course. And I. 20 years I've been with the Harringtons. Seen M through thick and thin." Miss Marple accepted the cup, noting the slight tremor in Agnes's grip. "Thomas was a recent addition, I gather." 5 years, Jenkins said. "Did he fit in well?" Agnes's eyes darted to the window. "Well enough, Miss. Quiet lad, kept to himself, but lately, he seemed worried. Owed money, like I told you. Played cards with the staff, but nothing vicious." "Cards," Miss Marple echoed thoughtfully. "A harmless pastime, until it isn't. We had a young man in the village once, similar troubles. Borrowed from the wrong sort." "Did Thomas mention anyone specific?" Agnes hesitated, then leaned in. "He did say something about a loan from Master Geoffrey. Said it was to tide him over, but Geoffrey pressed for repayment, sharpish. Thomas was fretting about it just last week." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles clicking softly as she began a new row. "How interesting. And on the night of the murder you were in the pantry during the search?" "Yes, Miss. Alone, heard nothing till the scream. Nothing at all. No footsteps, no doors creaking." Agnes shook her head, but her fingers twisted the polishing cloth. "Well, there was a rustle outside the door around 10. Thought it was the cat, but now." Miss Marple filed this away, thanking Agnes warmly, before moving on. Next, she encountered Muriel in the conservatory, where the young woman sat amid wilting orchids, staring blankly at a book. "Mrs. Harrington," Miss Marple said gently, taking a seat nearby. "Such a trying time. You must be exhausted." Muriel looked up, her eyes rimmed with red. "Oh, Miss Marple, yes, quite. I hardly slept. Poor Thomas, and Geoffrey's so on edge. Marriage can be a strain under such circumstances," Miss Marple observed. "You and Geoffrey, how long have you been wed?" 3 years, Muriel replied, her voice soft. "He's ambitious, you know, wants to prove himself to his father. But the debts, they weigh on him." "Debts," Miss Marple repeated mildly. "From his work in the city?" Muriel nodded, then bit her lip. "And other things. He lent money to Thomas, thinking it a kindness, but now, the inspector keeps asking about it. And your alibi, you were with Geoffrey in the library, but stepped out." "Yes, to the conservatory. I needed air. It was only a few minutes, around 10:25, I think. I saw no one." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "This conservatory has a door to the garden, doesn't it? Convenient for a breath of fresh air." Muriel flushed. "I didn't go out, just paced here." "Of course, my dear," Miss Marple said soothingly, though she noted the way Muriel's hands clenched her book, a romance novel, its pages unmarked, as if unread. Geoffrey was next found, smoking by the stable yard. He greeted Miss Marple with forced politeness, his eyes shadowed. "Miss Marple, mother says you're some sort of sleuth." "Hardly, Mr. Harrington," she replied. "Merely an old woman who notices things, like how you drum your fingers, a sign of impatience, or perhaps nerves." Geoffrey stubbed out his cigarette. "Nerves, wouldn't you be, with a murder in the house, and father dangling that emerald like a carrot?" "The inheritance," Miss Marple prompted. "It troubles you." "Damned right, it does. Father's will favours Victoria, I suspect. She's always been his pet. And my debts, ... Well, they're no secret, including the loan to Thomas." Geoffrey's jaw tightened. "A pittance. He begged for it, said he owed rough types in town. I gave it, but he dragged his feet repaying." "And during the search you were in the library alone after Muriel left?" "Yes, heard nothing unusual." "Satisfied?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Quite. It reminds me of young Tommy Pierce in the village always, borrowing, never repaying. Led to quite a fuss." Geoffrey snorted and stalked away, but Miss Marple noted his glance toward the terrace, where Thomas had met his end. Victoria Harrington proved more elusive, but Miss Marple found her in the upstairs sitting room, applying lipstick with a steady hand despite the circumstances. "Miss Harrington," Miss Marple said, entering. "Such a lovely gown you wore last night, emerald green, chosen for the occasion." Victoria capped her lipstick, her smile brittle. "Why, yes, to honor the family jewel. Tragic about Thomas, isn't it? He was always so helpful with my luggage." "Indeed, you were close." "Not particularly, but he did confide. Once said he admired my independence. Poor boy was trapped here, you know, trapped by debts, perhaps." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "He mentioned something of the sort. Borrowed from uncle, I think. Or was it Geoffrey?" Miss Marple leaned forward. "And your alibi with Lady Eleanor upstairs?" "Yes, the whole time. We checked. The bedroom's nothing amiss. But you stepped out briefly, didn't you? To powder your nose, around 10. Victoria hesitated. "How did you?" "Yes, for a moment. The powder room is down the hall. Saw no one." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting progressing. "Powder rooms can be such private places, like the church vestry in St. Mary. Mead secrets whispered there." Victoria laughed lightly, but her hand shook as she lit a cigarette. Colonel Blakely was in the billiard room, practicing shots with mechanical precision. "Miss Marple," he boomed, "care for a game?" "No thank you, Colonel. My eyes aren't what they were. But tell me about India. You and Sir Reginald served together." "Aye, good times. Until that blasted plantation went sour. Lost a packet, but water under the bridge. Yet grudges linger," Miss Marple suggested gently. Blakely missed his shot. "Not from me. Reginald promised to make good. The emerald might help, eh? And Thomas, did he know of this?" "Valet hears everything. Nosy chap. Once asked about my flask, thought it brandy, but it's medicinal." "During the search you were in the kitchens alone?" "Yes. Checked the pantries. Heard a door close around 10:25, thought it Agnes." Miss Marple thanked him, noting the flask's bulge in his pocket. Finally, she spoke with Sir Reginald in the study, where he sat brooding over papers. "Miss Marple, Eleanor, you was touching, but this is a matter for the police." "Of course," she agreed, "but the key lost during dinner. Anyone brush against you?" "Everyone did. Handshakes, toasts, could have been picked. And Thomas loyal, you say?" "To a fault. Though he did ask for an advance last month. Said it was for family." Miss Marple paused. "Family, he had none, according to Agnes." Sir Reginald frowned. Odd that Lady Eleanor, joining them, confirmed her alibi with Victoria, but mentioned a brief separation when Victoria visited the powder room. As the day wore on, Miss Marple pieced together the subtle details. The rustle Agnes heard at 10:20, conservatory visit at 10:25, Victoria's powder room trip at the same time, the Colonel's door closing, Geoffrey alone, Sir Reginald guarded, and Thomas, dead by 11, stabbed from the front. Over luncheon, tensions simmered. Inspector Craddock shared that the notes paper matched the studies, the ink fresh, no fingerprints on the dagger. Miss Marple, eating sparingly, observed the group. "It's like the vicar's tea party," she murmured to Lady Eleanor. "Everyone polite, but the undercurrents. ... By afternoon, she had noted enough inconsistencies to ponder deeply. The questions had begun, revealing fractures in alibis and motives entwined like vines. The emerald's enigma deepened, its curse a veil for human deceit. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The afternoon sun cast elongated shadows across the lawns of Harrington Manor, as if stretching fingers toward hidden truths. Miss Jane Marple, having concluded her morning inquiries, retired to the garden bench with her knitting, ostensibly to enjoy the fleeting warmth, but in reality to observe the comings and goings of the household. From this vantage, she could see the terrace where Thomas had met his untimely end. The flagstones now scrubbed clean, but bearing an invisible stain of violence. Inspector Craddock's men moved about methodically, measuring distances and noting footprints, their voices a low murmur against the rustle of leaves. Lady Eleanor joined her shortly, carrying a tray of tea things. "Miss Marple, you must think us a dreadful lot trapped here like characters in a melodrama." "Not at all, my dear," Miss Marple replied, her needles clicking steadily. "Families are much the same everywhere. In St. Mary Mead, we had the Prothero such tensions over inheritance. It ended badly, as these things often do." Lady Eleanor poured the tea, her hands steady despite the strain. "The inspector is focusing on Geoffrey now. Those debts, and the loan to Thomas. It looks suspicious. Appearances can be deceiving," Miss Marple said mildly, "like red herrings in a detective novel placed to mislead." As if on cue, Inspector Craddock emerged from the house, his face set in determined lines. He approached the bench, notebook in hand. "Lady Harrington, Miss Marple, a word, if you please. We've uncovered something damning." Lady Eleanor's cup paused midway to her lips. "What is it, Inspector?" Craddock glanced at Miss Marple, as if debating her inclusion, then proceeded. "A search of Geoffrey's room turned up a letter from Thomas, dated last week. It demands repayment of the loan quite forcefully. Thomas threatens to reveal certain indiscretions to Sir Reginald, if not paid by month's end." Lady Eleanor paled. "Indiscretions? What could that mean?" "Blackmail, perhaps," Craddock said grimly. "And there's more. A witness from the villager pub landlord says Geoffrey argued with Thomas in the local 2 nights ago." Raised voices, threats exchanged. Miss Marple set down her knitting. "How intriguing. And Geoffrey's alibi for the murder time alone in the library." "Precisely," Craddock replied. "No one to corroborate. He's the obvious suspect. Motive, opportunity, and now this letter." Sir Reginald, overhearing from the open window, stormed out. "My own son. Preposterous. Geoffrey's hot-headed, but murder." "Facts don't lie, sir," Craddock said. "I'm taking him in for questioning at the station." The household gathered as Geoffrey was led away, his protests ringing through the air. "This is absurd. I didn't kill him. Thomas was a friend." Muriel clung to Lady Eleanor's arm, tears streaming. "He couldn't have, could he?" Victoria, watching from the doorway, lit a cigarette with a flick of her lighter. "Poor Geoffrey. Always the black sheep." Colonel Blakely ramphed. "Damned shame. But if he did it, justice must be served." As the police car crunched down the drive, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her expression thoughtful. "Convenient, isn't it? That letter, surfacing now." Lady Eleanor turned to her. "You think it's planted?" "One must consider all possibilities," Miss Marple said. "In my experience, the obvious suspect is often a diversion. Like the time our village postmistress was accused of theft, turned out to be a set-up by her rival." The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of whispers and speculation. Inspector Craddock, satisfied with his lead, departed for the station, leaving a constable to guard the manor. Miss Marple, however, was not idle. She requested a walk with Sir Reginald, who obliged with gruff reluctance. "Sir Reginald," she began as they strolled the garden paths, "tell me more about Thomas. Loyal, you said, but did he have enemies?" Sir Reginald tugged at his moustache. "None that I know, though he did mention troubles. Gambling debts in town. I advanced him money once." "Generous of you," Miss Marple noted. "And the Colonel his investment grievance. Does it still rankle?" Sir Reginald sighed. "Arthur's a good sort, but yes, he lost heavily. I've offered compensation, but pride gets in the way." They paused by the terrace. Miss Marple examined the ground anew, noting a faint scuff mark near the door. Curious, as if something was dragged or, perhaps a struggle avoided. Sir Reginald frowned. "Thomas was stabbed from the front. Trusted his killer." "Indeed," Miss Marple agreed. "Trust is a fragile thing." Returning indoors, she encountered Victoria in the hall, sorting through mail. "Miss Harrington, a moment, that green gown quite striking. Did Thomas admire it?" Victoria's smile faltered. "Thomas, he helped with my cases, that's all." "Why?" "Just wondering," Miss Marple said airily. "Servants notice fashions. And your trip to the powder room during the search, did you hear anything unusual?" "Nothing," Victoria replied quickly. "Aunt Eleanor was nearby." But Miss Marple noted the slight hesitation, like a stitch dropped in knitting. Muriel, meanwhile, had taken to her room, overcome with nerves. Miss Marple visited her, bearing a soothing tisane prepared by Agnes. "Mrs. Harrington, my dear," she said, sitting by the bed. "Such a shock about Geoffrey. But tell me, did Thomas ever confide in you?" Muriel wiped her eyes. "Once. He said Geoffrey's loan was to cover his own debts, but Geoffrey demanded interest. It strained things. And your stroll to the conservatory, did you see anyone in the garden?" Muriel shook her head. "No, but I heard a twig snap, around 10-20-5, thought it the wind." Miss Marple patted her hand. "Details matter, my dear, like in St. Mary Mead, when a snapped branch revealed a poacher." As evening approached, Colonel Blakely sought out Miss Marple in the drawing-room. "Miss Marple, you're a perceptive old girl. Think Geoffrey did it?" "One mustn't jump to conclusions," she replied. "Your flask medicinal, you say?" Blakely chuckled. "For the nerves. War wounds, you know." "Understandable," Miss Marple said. "And during your kitchen search, that door closing at 10-20-5, could it have been from the garden?" Blakely pondered. "Possible. The service door leads out." Agnes, serving sherry, added unbidden, "I heard that rustle too, miss, from the pantry. And Thomas, he was sweet on Miss Victoria, I think. Always lingering when she visited." Victoria, entering just then, overheard. Absurd. Thomas was beneath notice. But her cheeks flushed, and Miss Marple noted it. Dinner was a subdued affair, Geoffrey's absence a gaping void. Sir Reginald brooded over his port, Lady Eleanor maintained composure, and the others picked at their food. Talk turned to the emerald, locked away but looming large. "If Geoffrey's arrested," Victoria ventured, "does that affect the will?" Sir Reginald glared. "Insensitive girl. But no, the emerald goes to the most deserving." The Colonel raised his glass. "To justice." Then, after dinner, Miss Marple retired early, but slipped downstairs later, her soft shoes silent on the stairs. In the study, she examined the safe again, noting the portraits hinged lightly oiled, as if recently used. A noise from the hall startled her. Agnes, carrying a tray. "Miss, can't sleep?" "Just thinking, my dear," Miss Marple said. "That letter in Geoffrey's room, how was it found?" "Under the mattress," Agnes replied. "Inspector's man spotted it." "Planted, perhaps," Miss Marple mused. "And the pub argument witnessed by whom?" "The landlord, as the inspector said." Miss Marple nodded, but doubt lingered. Red herrings abounded. Geoffrey's motive too obvious, the letter too convenient, the argument too public. By midnight, as the manor slept, Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting in the moonlight. The police were misled, but she saw deeper the ties of jealousy, debt, and unspoken desires weaving a net. The obvious suspect diverted attention, but the true killer lurked in the shadows. Their dagger hidden but not forgotten. Tomorrow, she resolved, more lies would surface. For now, the red herring swam freely, but Miss Marple's net was closing. Chapter 6. More lies surfaced the third day at Harrington Manor, unfolded under a sky heavy with impending rain. The clouds gathering like unspoken accusations over the estate. Miss Jane Marple, ever the early riser, had taken her customary seat in the morning room by 8 o'clock, her knitting bag at her side, and a cup of tea steaming gently before her. From this quiet corner, she could observe the household's stirrings, the muffled footsteps of Agnes in the hall, the distant clatter from the kitchen, and the occasional creak of floorboards overhead as the family roused themselves from fitful slumbers. Geoffrey had returned late the previous night, released by Inspector Craddock for lack of conclusive evidence, though the shadow of suspicion clung to him like mist to the hills. Lady Eleanor entered first, her face etched with the weariness of one who had borne too many burdens. "Miss Marple," she said, sinking into a chair opposite, "Geoffrey is home, but the inspector warns he remains under watch. That letter, ... it torments me." Miss Marple looked up from her knitting, her blue eyes mild yet penetrating. "Letters can be such deceptive things, my dear. In St. Mary Mead, we had a case of anonymous notes turned out to be from the least expected quarter. One must dig deeper, always." Before Lady Eleanor could reply, Sir Reginald appeared, his moustache bristling with indignation. "Deeper. The boy's innocent, I tell you." That pub argument was over nothing, a trifling disagreement about cards. Cards again, Miss Marple murmured, thoughtfully. They seemed to weave through this affair like a persistent thread. The breakfast table soon filled, the atmosphere thick with restraint. Geoffrey slouched in his seat, dark circles under his eyes, while Muriel fussed over him with anxious solicitude. Victoria arrived fashionably late, her makeup impeccable but unable to mask the faint lines of strain. Colonel Blakeley, nursing his coffee, exchanged terse nods with Sir Reginald, their old camaraderie frayed by the events. Inspector Craddock joined them mid-meal, his notebook at the ready. "Good morning, all. I've new information from Thomas's effects. A bank book shows deposits here, but substantial, and withdrawals matching Geoffrey's loan." Geoffrey slammed his fist on the table. "I told you, it was a loan, not extortion." Thomas was in deep with bookmakers in Ashford Cross. Craddock's eyes narrowed. Bookmakers who claimed Thomas owed them nothing. "But you, Mr. Harrington, frequented the same establishments. Perhaps a shared vice," Muriel gasped. "Geoffrey gambling." Geoffrey flushed. "A flutter now and then. Nothing serious." But Miss Marple noted the way his hand trembled as he reached for his tea, and the quick glance he shot at Victoria, who toyed with her napkin, her expression inscrutable. As the inspector pressed on, questioning alibis anew, Miss Marple excused herself for a stroll in the garden. The air was damp, carrying the scent of earth and decaying leaves, and she walked slowly along the paths, her mind sifting through the morning's revelations. Financial motives were emerging, tangled like overgrown ivy. Geoffrey's debts, Thomas's mysterious deposits. But feuds simmered to the Colonel's lingering resentment. Perhaps deeper than admitted. She paused by the terrace, where a gardener raked leaves, and engaged him in conversation. "A dreadful business, that poor valet," she said mildly. The gardener, an elderly man named Hobbs, straightened. "I, Miss Thomas were a quiet one, but he had his troubles. Argued with the Colonel last week. I overheard something about money owed from India days." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. "India? How curious. And did Thomas mention details?" Hobbs shook his head. "Nay, but the Colonel fair shouted. 'Keep your nose out,' he said." Thanking Hobbs, Miss Marple continued her circuit, her thoughts turning to bitter feuds. It reminded her of old Colonel Bantry and his war comrade, old wounds festering into something poisonous. Returning indoors, she found Colonel Blakeley in the billiard room, alone with his thoughts and a decanter. "Colonel," she said, entering quietly, "might I join you? The garden chill has set in." Blakeley looked up, his ruddy face momentarily unguarded. "Miss Marple, by all means. Care for a brandy? Medicinal, you know." "No, thank you," she replied, settling into a chair. "But tell me about India. You and Sir Reginald, such adventures." Blakeley's grip tightened on his cue. "Adventures, yes, but the plantation, that was a fiasco. Lost my savings. Reginald promised restitution, but it's been years." "And Thomas," Miss Marple prompted gently, "did he know of this?" Blakeley hesitated, then sighed. "The boy eavesdropped once. Confronted me about it, said Reginald owed me more than admitted. Cheeky pup. I told him to mind his business." "Around 10 days ago?" Miss Marple inquired. About then." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting resuming its rhythm. "Feuds can simmer, Colonel, like the quarrel between our village blacksmith and the farrier over a horse, but really about pride." Blakeley grunted, but his eyes avoided hers. Lunch brought further unravelings. As Agnes served the soup, Inspector Craddock announced a discovery. A locket in Thomas's room, containing a photograph of Victoria, inscribed with affectionate words. Victoria's spoon clattered. "That's preposterous. I gave him no such thing." Craddock produced the item, a silver heart on a chain. Found hidden, in his drawer, the inscription, "To my dearest V, with eternal love, your handwriting, Miss Harrington." Victoria's colour rose. It must be a forgery. Thomas was infatuated. Perhaps, but I never encouraged him. Geoffrey sneered. "Infatuated? You flirted, shamelessly, Victoria, always batting your lashes at the staff. Jealous, cousin," Victoria shot back, "or covering your own tracks." Lady Eleanor intervened. "Enough. This is unseemly." But Miss Marple observed the flush on Victoria's cheeks, the way her hand strayed to her throat as if missing the locket. Hidden affairs, indeed, like the scandal with the curate's daughter in St. Mary Mead, all whispers until the truth burst forth. After lunch, Miss Marple requested a private word with Victoria in the sitting room. "My dear," she began, "that locket, quite romantic. Was Thomas more than a valet to you?" Victoria lit a cigarette, her hands unsteady. "Absolutely not. He ... he admired me, yes. Helped with my Paris trip, scurried messages, that sort. But love, ridiculous messages." Miss Marple echoed. "To whom?" Victoria exhaled smoke. "Friends, designers, nothing important." But her eyes darted away, and Miss Marple sensed the lie, layered like veils. Muriel, overhearing from the hall, entered tearfully. "Victoria, if you and Thomas, did Geoffrey know?" "Know what?" Geoffrey demanded, appearing behind her. The room tensed, feuds erupting. Geoffrey accused Victoria of leading Thomas on, perhaps to extract favors or money. Victoria retorted that Geoffrey's gambling had dragged Thomas into debt, using him as a go-between for bookmakers. Sir Reginald, drawn by the voices, thundered in. "Silence. This family is tearing itself apart." The Colonel, lurking nearby, added gruffly, "Sounds like motive aplenty. Thomas knew too much about all of us." Inspector Craddock, summoned by the commotion, took notes furiously. Affairs, debts, feuds, and the emerald ties it all. "Sir Reginald, your will does it mention restitution to the Colonel?" Sir Reginald stiffened. "That's private." But the inspector pressed, revealing a solicitor's letter found in Thomas's effects, hinting at changes to the will, excluding Geoffrey and favoring Victoria, with a provision for the Colonel's losses. Geoffrey paled. "Father, is this true?" Sir Reginald nodded reluctantly. "I intended to announce it." Thomas typed the draft he knew. Motive upon motive surfaced. Geoffrey's disinheritance, Victoria's gain but threatened by an affair's exposure. The Colonel's financial grudge, even Lady Eleanor's quiet fury at her husband's secrets. That as afternoon faded into evening, rain pattered against the windows, mirroring the household's gloom. Miss Marple, in her room, reviewed the day's lies. The locket's inscription, matched to Victoria's hand by took. The Colonel's shouted argument, witnessed by Hobbs. Geoffrey's gambling den visits, confirmed by Muriel's reluctant admission. Downstairs, Agnes confided to Miss Marple over tea. Thomas and Miss Victoria, they met in the garden sometimes, whispering, and he gave her money once from his deposits. "Deposits from where?" Miss Marple asked. Agnes shrugged. "He said, a windfall. But I saw him with the Colonel, too, handing over envelopes. More threads, perhaps blackmail, or payoffs. Bitter feuds intertwined with hidden affairs, financial webs, pulling tight. Dinner was tense, conversations stilted. Afterward, Miss Marple conversed with Lady Eleanor. "My dear, does Sir Reginald keep secrets from you?" Lady Eleanor sighed. "Many. The will. I urged fairness, but he favors Victoria. And Thomas, he suspected her involvement with the boy." Miss Marple nodded. "Lies surface like bubbles in a pond. One pops, and others follow." As night fell, the manor hushed, but suspicions roared. Miss Marple, knitting by the fire, pondered the emerging truths. Affairs exposed, motives financial, and emotional feuds bitter as gall. The emerald's enigma deepened, its ties treacherous, daggers hidden in words and glances. Tomorrow, she sensed, an emotional breaking point loomed. Chapter 7. The Emotional Turning Point. The rain that had threatened all day finally broke over Harrington Manor as evening descended, drumming against the windows like insistent fingers demanding entry. Inside, the atmosphere was no less charged, the revelations of the previous hours hanging heavy in the air, thickening the suspicion that bound the household like chains. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the drawing-room with her knitting, appeared the epitome of serenity amid the storm, her needles moving with rhythmic precision as she observed the family through half-closed eyes. But her mind was a whirlwind of connections, piecing together the fragments of lies, motives, and half-truths that had surfaced like debris after a flood. Lady Eleanor had retired early, pleading a headache, but not before confiding in Miss Marple. Over a cup of chamomile tea. "It's too much," she had whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. "The secrets. They poison everything. Reginald's will, Victoria's indiscretions, Geoffrey's recklessness, and poor Thomas, caught in the middle." Miss Marple had patted her hand gently. "Poison, my dear, often has an antidote in truth, but truth can be painful to swallow, like the time our village doctor prescribed a bitter tourniquet, cured the ailment. But oh, the faces pulled. Now, as the clock ticked toward 9, the others gathered sporadically in the drawing-room. drawn by the fire's warmth or perhaps the need for company in the face of isolation. Sir Reginald nursed a brandy, his face a map of furrowed worries. Geoffrey paced, his earlier defiance crumbling into agitation, while Muriel sat nearby, her handkerchief sodden from silent tears. Victoria, ever the picture of composure, flipped through a magazine, but her eyes scarcely moved across the pages. Colonel Blakely, his flask in hand, stared into the flames, his military posture sagging. Inspector Craddock had departed for the evening, promising to return at dawn with forensic results from the dagger and note, but his absence did little to ease the tension. Agnes hovered at the edges, serving coffee with mechanical efficiency, her own face pale and drawn. It was Geoffrey who broke the silence first, stopping his pacing to face his father. "This can't go on, father. The will you were going to cut me out. After all I've done to prove myself." Sir Reginald set down his glass with a clink. "Prove yourself? With gambling and debts. Thomas warned me, you know, said you'd dragged him into your messes." Geoffrey's face twisted. "Thomas lied. He was the one with the habits using my name at the bookmaker's." Victoria looked up sharply. "Your name? Or perhaps mine? He carried messages for me, but nothing more." Muriel's head snapped toward her. "Messages to lovers in Paris, I suppose. And that locket, you did give it to him, didn't you?" Victoria's magazine slipped to the floor. "How dare you? Thomas was. He was kind, that's all. Helped me when Uncle was stingy with allowances." The Colonel chuckled bitterly. "Allowances? Try restitution. Reginald owes me thousands from that cursed plantation." Thomas knew it, poked his nose in, asking questions. Sir Reginald rose, his voice thundering. "Enough. Thomas is dead, and you're all squabbling like vultures over his corpse." But the dam had cracked, and the flood of emotions poured forth. Muriel, her voice rising in a wail, stood suddenly. "It's all too much. Geoffrey, tell them you argued with Thomas that night, didn't you? Before dinner, in the hall, I heard you something about money." Geoffrey whirled on her. "Muriel, hold your tongue." But Muriel, tears streaming, shook her head. "No, I can't anymore. You said you'd handle it, but now, the police think you did it, and that letter they found it, because I told the inspector where to look." The room froze. Geoffrey stared at his wife, betrayal etching his features. "You what?" Muriel collapsed back into her chair, sobbing. "I had to. You were so angry that day. Thomas came to you demanding repayment, and you shouted you'd make him regret it. I thought, if they found the letter, it would clear things, show it was just a quarrel. But now it looks worse." Miss Marple, her knitting paused, leaned forward, slightly. "My dear Mrs. Harrington, that was brave of you. Secrets fester, you know, like an untreated wound in the village. Our baker's apprentice hid a theft, and it nearly ruined him until he confessed." Geoffrey sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "It's true. I argued with Thomas. He wasn't just borrowing, he was blackmailing me. Knew about my losses at the track, threatened to tell father unless I forgave the loan." Sir Reginald's face purpled. "Blackmail? From my own valet? Not just you," Geoffrey muttered. "He had dirt on all of us. Told me so, said Victoria was using him to smuggle letters to a married man in Paris, that the Colonel was doctoring his medicinal flask with something stronger, perhaps opium from India days." The Colonel spluttered. "Lies. My flask is for rheumatism, brandy and herbs, nothing more." But his hand strayed to his pocket, and Miss Marple noted the defensive hunch of his shoulders. Victoria, her composure shattering, stood abruptly. "Thomas, wouldn't he? He cared for me. Those letters were innocent fashion contacts. But he did ask for money, said he needed it for debts." "Debts from what?" Inspector Craddock's voice would have demanded, but in his absence, it was Miss Marple who asked softly, perhaps from helping others, or covering his own indiscretions. Agnes, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward, her voice trembling. "He he confided in me, said he was in over his head. Borrowed from Geoffrey, but also from the Colonel to pay off old army debts, he said, and Miss Victoria. She gave him the locket as a token, but then regretted it when he grew too attached." Victoria whirled on her. "Agnes, you spy." "No," Miss Agnes replied, tears welling. "I cared for him too, like a son. He told me everything that last night before the search. Said he was going to confront someone, make it right." The room erupted anew, accusations flying. Sir Reginald accused the Colonel of corrupting Thomas with tales of India. The Colonel retorted that Sir Reginald's stinginess drove the boy to desperation. Geoffrey blamed Victoria for leading Thomas on. Victoria snapped that Geoffrey's gambling had started the chain, but it was Muriel who, amid the chaos, broke fully. She rose, her voice a hysterical cry. "Stop, all of you stop. Thomas didn't deserve this. He came to me that afternoon, begged for help, said Geoffrey was threatening him, that if he didn't pay, there'd be trouble. I gave him money from my own savings, but it wasn't enough. And that night, during the search, I saw someone slip out to the terrace. The group turned as one, the storm outside mirroring the one within. Who?" Sir Reginald demanded. Muriel hesitated, her eyes darting to each face, then whispered, I can't be sure. It was dark, but the figure had a limp like the Colonel's. Blakely surged to his feet. "Absurd. My limp is from the war. Everyone knows it. I was in the kitchens." But the seed was planted, and the emotional torrent continued. The Colonel, his face ashen, slumped back. "All right, damn it. Thomas did come to me. Knew about the plantation swindle, said Reginald had pocketed insurance money meant for me. Demanded a cut to keep quiet. I paid him off, but he wanted more." Sir Reginald gasped. "Swindle. It was a loss. Pure and simple. Lies." The Colonel growled. "Thomas had papers, stole them from your safe." "Perhaps," Miss Marple interjected gently. "Papers. The safe was open that night, and the key lost during dinner. Convenient for someone who knew where to look." Victoria, tears now streaking her makeup, confessed partially. "Thomas and we were close once. A fling, nothing more. But he grew possessive. That note about the curse, he wrote similar dramatic things to me. Perhaps he staged something, but it went wrong." Geoffrey laughed bitterly. "Staged. With father's dagger in his chest." The revelations cascaded, partial truths spilling like rain from the eaves. Agnes admitted overhearing Thomas planning to expose the family's secrets at dinner, hence the timing. Lady Eleanor, descending upon hearing the voices, added her own crack. "Reginald, you knew Thomas was trouble. You argued with him that morning about the will." Sir Reginald, deflated. "Yes, he typed it, then hinted at changes for a price." As the clock struck 10, the group sat exhausted, the emotional storm spent. Partial truths had emerged, blackmail threading through every relationship. Thomas the unwitting center, his death perhaps a desperate act to silence him forever. Miss Marple, her knitting set aside, spoke softly. "You see, my dears, when one breaks, others follow. Like dominoes in the village halt, tip one, and the chain falls." But she knew these were partial truths, veils over the full picture. The turning point had come, emotions raw and exposed. Now, the trap could be set. Outside, the rain eased, but the night held its breath, waiting for the final unraveling. Chapter 8. The trap. The morning after the emotional outpourings at Harrington Manor brought a fragile clarity, like sunlight piercing through the remnants of storm clouds. The rain had ceased during the night, leaving the gardens glistening, the air fresh with the scent of wet earth. Miss Jane Marple, who had retired late but risen early, sat in the morning room with her knitting, reflecting on the partial truths that had emerged like cracks in a dam. Blackmail, affairs, feuds, all woven into a tapestry of deceit, with Thomas at its tragic center. Yet the full picture remained obscured, the killer's identity hidden behind layers of misdirection. It was time, she decided, to set the trap, gather the suspects and apply the subtle pressure of psychology, drawing out the final admissions through observation and insinuation. Lady Eleanor, joining her for breakfast, noted Miss Marple's contemplative expression. "You seem thoughtful this morning, Miss Marple. After last night's confessions, do you see the way forward?" Miss Marple sipped her tea delicately. "Indeed, my dear, confessions are like village gossip, half true, half veiled, but with careful prodding, the veil lifts. I suggest we assemble everyone this afternoon. A little gathering, perhaps in the drawing room, to discuss the events. The inspector should be present. His authority adds weight." Lady Eleanor nodded, her own resolve strengthening. "I'll arrange it. Reginald will grumble, but it's necessary." By midday, Inspector Craddock returned, bearing reports from the laboratory. The dagger bore no fingerprints but traces of a fine oil, as if recently cleaned. The note's ink matched the studies, but the paper showed faint creases, suggesting it had been folded and carried beforehand. "Premeditated," Craddock declared in the library, where Sir Reginald and Geoffrey listened grimly. And those deposits in Thomas's account, traced to anonymous transfers, likely payoffs. Geoffrey, still pale from the previous night's revelations, muttered, "Payoffs from whom? Not me was the one being squeezed." Craddock eyed him. "Perhaps, but your wife's admission about the argument strengthens the case against you." Miss Marple, entering quietly, interjected mildly, "Cases, Inspector, are like jigsaw puzzles. One forces a piece, and the picture Might we all convene this afternoon? I have a few observations to share." Craddock raised an eyebrow. "Observations? This isn't a parlour game, Miss Marple." "Of course not," she replied with a faint smile. "But human nature is predictable. In St. Mary Mead, we had a similar affair. A gathering revealed all." Reluctantly, Craddock agreed, and word was sent. By 3 o'clock, the drawing-room was prepared. Chairs arranged in a semicircle facing the fireplace. Tea trays at the ready, though appetites were scant. The emeralds case, retrieved from the safe under Craddock's supervision, sat on the mantel, a silent provocateur. The group assembled with varying degrees of reluctance. Sir Reginald took his armchair, moustache twitching irritably. Lady Eleanor sat beside him, composed but watchful. Geoffrey and Muriel occupied the sofa, her hand clutching his in silent support. Victoria perched on a stool, her legs crossed elegantly, a cigarette holder in hand. Colonel Blakeley stood by the window, flask bulging in his pocket, while Agnes hovered at the door, included at Miss Marple's insistence. Inspector Craddock stood formally, notebook open. "Miss Marple has requested this meeting. I'll allow it, but remember this is an official inquiry." Miss Marple, seated unobtrusively, set her knitting aside and cleared her throat. "Thank you, Inspector. I shan't take long. You see, this tragic affair reminds me so much of village life. People are the same everywhere, driven by greed, jealousy, fear. Thomas, poor boy, knew too much. He blackmailed Jesper gently, out of desperation. His death was no curse, but a calculated act to silence him forever." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room, noting the subtle shifts, Geoffrey's clenched jaw, Victoria's averted eyes, the Colonel's fidgeting with his walking stick. "Let us reconstruct that fateful evening," Miss Marple continued. "Dinner at 8, the emerald displayed, Sir Reginald's announcement about the will tensions high. Then, at 9:15, Agnes discovers the safe open, the dagger missing, the key gone from Sir Reginald's pocket." Agnes nodded vigorously. "Yes, Miss gave me quite a turn. The search begins," Miss Marple went on. "Each of you scattered, Geoffrey and Muriel in the library, Victoria and Lady Eleanor upstairs, the Colonel in the kitchens, Sir Reginald in the study, Agnes in the pantry, Thomas sent to fetch servants but vanishes, Muriel whispered, and I saw that figure with a limp." The Colonel bristled. "Nonsense. My limp is distinctive, but anyone could feign it." "Precisely," Miss Marple said mildly, feigning to mislead. "Like the note about the curse, theatrical and distracting. Written in advance, folded, placed in Thomas's hand post-mortem." Craddock leaned forward. "Post-mortem, how do you know?" "The smudges," Miss Marple explained. "Ink dry, but creases suggest carrying. And the dagger oiled, wiped clean, premeditated, as you said." She turned to Geoffrey. "Mr. Harrington, your argument with Thomas blackmail over gambling. You threatened him, yes?" Geoffrey nodded grimly. "But I didn't kill him." "Of course not," Miss Marple agreed. "Your alibi is weak, but your temper is hot, too obvious for such a calculated crime. Like young Freddy in the village, always the suspect, never the culprit." Geoffrey exhaled, relief flickering. Miss Marple's eyes shifted to Victoria. "Miss Harrington, your affair with Thomas Fling, you called it." He grew possessive, demanded more. "The locket, the letters to Paris, perhaps not so innocent." Victoria stubbed out her cigarette. "He helped me, that's all. Smuggled designs, or so I said. But yes, he wanted money to flee with me. I refused, and that night," Miss Marple pressed gently, I met him briefly during the search, in the hall. He begged again. I sent him away." "A partial truth," Miss Marple said softly. "But you followed him to the terrace, didn't you? To end it permanently?" Victoria paled. "No, I wouldn't." The room tensed, but Miss Marple waved a hand. "Perhaps not. Affairs breed passion, but calculation." She addressed the Colonel. "Colonel Blakeley, your grudge deep, festering. Thomas knew of the plantation swindle, demanded hush money. You paid, but he pressed. Blakely's face reddened. Insolent boy, but murder. I'm a soldier, not a sneak. Soldiers strike from the front, Miss Marple noted. Thomas was stabbed facing his killer trusted them. Blakely nodded vigorously. Sir Reginald shifted uncomfortably as Miss Marple turned to him. Sir Reginald, Thomas typed your will, knew the changes, blackmailed you too. He hinted, Sir Reginald admitted, but I refused. A Harrington doesn't bow to servants. Pride, Miss Marple murmured, like old Mr. Enderby refused to pay, and it cost him dear. Lady Eleanor interjected, Miss Marple, surely not Reginald. Not alone, Miss Marple replied, but let's consider Agnes, loyal 20 years, but Thomas like a son until he strayed. Agnes wrung her hands. I loved him, miss, but he changed greedy. You heard the rustle at 10:20, Miss Marple said, from the pantry. Thomas, perhaps, slipping out. Agnes nodded, tears falling. Miss Marple leaned back, her voice dropping. Now, imagine, Thomas, desperate, plans to expose all at dinner, but someone learns arranges a meeting on the terrace during the search. Thomas trusts them, faces them. The dagger, stolen earlier, strikes. The note placed, a red herring. The group stirred, eyes darting suspiciously. But who, Craddock? Demanded. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Consider the timelines. At 10:20 rustles and snaps heard by Agnes Muriel, the Colonel. Victoria's powder room visit, Muriel's conservatory stroll, both near the garden door. Geoffrey, alone, but his watch stopped at 10 mentioned casually yesterday. Geoffrey blinked. My watch, it runs slow. A detail, Miss Marple said, but the oil on the dagger from the safe's hinge, recently oiled. Who oiled it? Sir Reginald frowned. Thomas did, last week. Or someone mimicking maintenance. Miss Marple countered. Pressure built, questions probing like needles. Victoria cracked first, admitting Thomas had threatened to reveal her Paris lover, married financier, funding her designs. He wanted half. I slapped him that night, but left him alive. The Colonel confessed his flask held laudanum, addiction, from war wounds. Thomas knew, blackmailed me for it. I paid, but no more. Geoffrey revealed Thomas had forged his signature on betting slips. He owed the bookies, used my name. Lady Eleanor, voice trembling, admitted, urging Reginald to sack Thomas. He was corrupting the household. Sir Reginald thundered, enough. This trap of yours, Miss Marple, it's ensnaring innocence. But one guilty, she replied calmly. The one who picked the key during dinner, a brush in the toast. Who proposed the toast? The Colonel. Blakely protested, but Miss Marple continued, and the limp Muriel softened, to implicate you. But the figure was slighter. Eyes turned to Muriel, who shrank back. Or perhaps, Miss Marple said, the one who gave Thomas money that afternoon, but demanded loyalty in return. Muriel sobbed. He promised to leave Geoffrey alone if I paid. But on the terrace, he laughed, said he'd take more. I grabbed the dagger from my pocket, where I had hidden it after finding the safe open. It was impulse. The room gasped. Geoffrey stared. Muriel, she broke fully. He was ruining us. The debts, the blackmail. I followed him out, begged. He mocked me. I sequenced, then placed the note. I'd written it earlier, thinking to scare him with the curse. Craddock stepped forward. Mrs. Harrington. Muriel nodded, collapsing. It was me to protect Geoffrey, our future. But Miss Marple shook her head gently. A noble lie, my dear, but not the truth. You didn't write the note. Your handwriting doesn't match. And the dagger was hidden by someone else. Muriel blinked, confused. The trap sprang psychological pressure, revealing not guilt, but attempts to shield others. The true killer, sensing the net closing, would soon betray themselves. Miss Marple watched, waiting for the final slip. As tea was served amid the tension, a hand trembled, a glance lingered too long. The trap was set. The pressure, mounting, the reveal loomed. Chapter 9. The reveal. The drawing room at Harrington Manor was a crucible of tension. The air thick with the aftermath of Muriel's tearful confession and Miss Marple's gentle but incisive dismantling of it. The fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows across the faces of the assembled, each betraying a mix of dread, relief, or defiance. The emerald's case gleamed on the mantel, a silent witness to the unraveling drama, its green fire seeming to pulse with secrets yet unspoken. Miss Jane Marple, seated unobtrusively with her knitting now resting in her lap, surveyed the group with the calm certainty of one who had seen human nature's darkest corners and emerged unshaken. The trap had been sprung, emotions laid bare, but the true killer remained cloaked, though not for long. Inspector Craddock, standing near the door with his notebook poised, broke the stunned silence. "Mrs. Harrington, you admit to striking Thomas with the dagger. This is a serious confession." Muriel, her face streaked with tears, shook her head frantically. "I thought I had to protect Geoffrey, ... But Miss Marple's right. I didn't write that note. I found the dagger in the study, yes, during the search, and hid it in my pocket. Foolish, I know. But when I met Thomas on the terrace, we only argued. I didn't kill him, I swear it." Geoffrey, his voice hoarse, gripped her hand. "Muriel, why didn't you tell me?" "I was afraid," she sobbed. "You were already under suspicion. I thought if I took the blame... Miss Marple interjected softly, her voice cutting through the chaos like a bell. "A noble instinct, my dear, but misguided. Lies to shield others often shield the guilty instead. Like in St. Mary Mead, when young Mary tried to cover for her brother's poaching, only muddied the waters." Sir Reginald, his face a storm of conflicting emotions, slammed his fist on the armrest. "This is intolerable. My own daughter-in-law, confessing to madness, and now recanting. Miss Marple, you've stirred a hornet's nest. If not Muriel, then who?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly, though her expression remained grave. "Patience, Sir Reginald. The truth is like a difficult stitch. It requires careful handling. Let us revisit the night of the murder, step by step, for the threads are now clear." She rose, her slight figure commanding the room despite its unassuming air. "At 8, dinner begins, the emerald displayed, your toast about the will-raising. Tensions by 9:15. Agnes discovers the safe open, the dagger missing, your key gone. Sir Reginald. A pickpocket's work during the toast, when all were close, glasses raised." The Colonel shifted uncomfortably. "You implied I proposed the toast, Miss Marple, but it was Reginald's idea." "Indeed," Miss Marple agreed. "But you seconded it, Colonel," with enthusiasm. A moment of distraction, hands brushing. The key was small, easily slipped from a pocket. Blakely bristled. "I'm no thief." "No," Miss Marple said calmly, "but someone was." The search begins at 9:30. Geoffrey in the library, Muriel briefly to the conservatory, Victoria upstairs with Lady Eleanor, but slipping to the powder room. Colonel Blakely in the kitchens, Agnes in the pantry. Thomas sent to fetch servants, but disappears by 10:15. Craddock nodded, following her lead, and by 11, he's found dead, stabbed with the dagger, the note in his hand. "Precisely," Miss Marple said. "Now, the alibi's flawed. Geoffrey alone, his watch stopped at 10, perhaps deliberately. Muriel's conservatory stroll, hearing a twig snap at 10:25. Victoria's powder room visit, near the garden door. The Colonel's kitchen door closing, also 10:25. Agnes's rustle at 10:20, all overlapping, all near. The terrace. Lady Eleanor, her voice steady but strained, asked, "Are you suggesting a conspiracy, Miss Marple?" "Not at all," Miss Marple replied, "but a single act, cloaked by many movements. The dagger was taken before the search, hidden, perhaps in a sleeve or pocket. The note, written earlier, carried by the killer. Thomas was lured to the terrace, stabbed by someone he trusted, facing them. The note placed to mislead, a curse to distract from truth." Victoria, her composure fraying, lit another cigarette. "You keep circling us, Miss Marple. If not Muriel, then who?" "I told you," I argued. "With Thomas, sent him away." Miss Marple nodded. "You did, my dear, but your locket, your letters, they tie you to him. He threatened to expose your Paris affair, didn't he? A married financier, funding your designs, perhaps more. Scandal would ruin you." Victoria's hand shook, ash falling to the carpet. He wanted to run away together. I refused. "But I didn't kill him, nor did you," Miss Marple agreed. "Your passion is real, but your movements too erratic for calculation." Her gaze shifted to the Colonel. "Colonel Blakely, your laudanum addiction, Thomas knew, blackmailed you, and the plantation loss papers he stole, perhaps, showing Sir Reginald's deceit, a motive for silence." Blakely's face reddened. "I paid him off. No need to kill." "Indeed," Miss Marple said. "You're limp." The Muriel saw a figure limping. "Not you, but someone feigning it, perhaps to cast suspicion." She turned to Geoffrey. "Mr. Harrington, your gambling debts, Thomas's blackmail, strong motives, but your watch, stopping at 10, suggests you were elsewhere, not in the library as claimed." Geoffrey paled. "I stepped out to the hall, to smoke, saw no one. A weak alibi," Miss Marple noted, "but too obvious for a killer's cunning." Sir Reginald, his patience thinning, growled, "Get to the point, woman. Who killed my valet?" Miss Marple's eyes rested on Lady Eleanor, who sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly. "Lady Eleanor, you've been silent, yet you urged Thomas's dismissal, knew of his blackmail. You were upstairs with Victoria, but parted briefly enough time to slip downstairs." Lady Eleanor's lips parted in protest. "I was protecting the family. Thomas was a viper, poisoning us all." "Protection can take many forms," Miss Marple said softly. "Like Mrs. Eldridge in St. Mary Mead, she hid her son's crimes, but at a cost. Let us consider the Daggers oil from the safe's hinge, recently lubricated, who had access to the study before dinner." Agnes, trembling, spoke up. "I dusted it, miss, but didn't touch the safe." "Of course not," Miss Marple said, "but someone did. Someone who knew the key's hiding place, who oiled the hinge to ensure silence, who took the dagger and wrote the note in advance." The room held its breath. Craddock's pencil hovered. Miss Marple's voice dropped, each word deliberate. "Lady Eleanor, you proposed the toast's timing, didn't you? To celebrate the emerald. You said, a moment when hands brushed, when Sir Reginald's key could be lifted. You knew Thomas typed the will, knew he blackmailed your husband, threatened to expose the family's fractures, Geoffrey's debts, Victoria's affair, the Colonel's loss. You saw the safe's hinge oiled by Thomas, knew its secrets." Lady Eleanor's face drained of colour. "This is absurd." "I was upstairs, but not always," Miss Marple countered. "Victoria's powder room visit at 10:20. Alone for minutes, enough to slip to the study, retrieve the dagger from where you'd hidden it, meet Thomas on the terrace. He trusted you, as the mistress who treated him kindly. You faced him, stabbed him, placed the note. A theatrical flourish, like your staged composure." Sir Reginald gasped. "Eleanor, no." Lady Eleanor rose, her voice icy. "You dare accuse me? I've held this family together." "You have," Miss Marple agreed, "at great cost. Thomas's demands threatened the legacy you emerald, the manor, the name. You acted to protect it, as you always have. The limp Muriel saw your ankle, twisted last week, noted by Agnes when you winced at tea." Agnes nodded reluctantly. "It's true, miss." She limped slightly. Lady Eleanor's composure cracked, her hands trembling. "You have no proof. The note," Miss Marple said, "your handwriting disguised, but the slant matches your household ledgers, seen this morning, and the oil your gloves, scented with lavender, left a trace on the safe, found by Craddock's men." Craddock nodded, flipping pages. "Confirmed an hour ago. Faint lavender oil, unique to your gloves, Lady Harrington." Lady Eleanor sank back, her face crumpling. I couldn't let him destroy us. Thomas knew everything. Reginald's insurance fraud, Victoria's lover, Geoffrey's ruin. He demanded the emerald itself, said he'd sell it and vanish. I took the key during the toast, opened the safe, hid the dagger in my shawl. That night, I met him on the terrace, begged him to stop. He laughed, said the curse was real, that he'd bring us down. I struck ... once. The note was mine to confuse, to protect. The room was silent, but for the fire's crackle. Sir Reginald stared at his wife, horror dawning. Geoffrey and Muriel clung to each other. Victoria's cigarette burned forgotten. The Colonel muttered, "Good God." Craddock stepped forward. "Lady Eleanor Harrington, I'm arresting you for the murder of Thomas Wells." As he led her away, her head high despite the tears, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her face serene, but tinged with sadness. The reveal was complete. The truth laid bare through careful steps and human nature's predictable flaws. Chapter 10. The Reflection. The journey back to St. Mary Mead from Harrington Manor had been a quiet one. The train rattling through the English countryside, as if echoing the unresolved thoughts in Miss Jane Marple's mind. The emerald's enigma was solved, the killer unmasked, and yet, as was often the case, the resolution brought not jubilation, but a profound sense of melancholy. Human nature, she reflected, was a tapestry woven with threads of frailty, and pulling one loose end often unravelled the whole. As the familiar spire of St. Mary Mead's church came into view from the carriage window, Miss Marple allowed herself a small sigh. Home, with its predictable rhythms and unassuming villagers, was a bomb after the grandeur and grief of the Harrington estate. Upon arriving at her cosy cottage, nestled amid neatly trimmed hedges and a garden bursting with the last blooms of autumn, Miss Marple was greeted by her faithful housekeeper, Florence, who bustled about with tea and scones, as if sensing her employer's need for normalcy. "Miss Marple, you look quite done in," Florence said, her round face creased with concern. "That manner, business dreadful, from what the papers say, a murder, and by the lady of the house no less." Miss Marple accepted the tea gratefully, settling into her favorite armchair by the window overlooking the garden. "Dreadful indeed, Florence, but necessary, in its way. Truth has a habit of emerging, like weeds in a flower bed. One must uproot them carefully, lest the roots remain." Florence nodded sagely, though her understanding was more practical than philosophical. "Well, you've a knack for it. The vicar was asking, after you says the parish could use your eye for the fate committee. Some mix-up with the jam entries. He reckons foul play." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Foul play in jam? It wouldn't be the first time. Tell him I'll call tomorrow." As Florence retreated to the kitchen, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to Harrington Manor. The reflection on such cases was, for her, an essential part of the process, a time to sift through the details, to draw the parallels that made sense. Of the chaos, Lady Eleanor's confession had been the culmination of subtle clues: the lavender-scented gloves, the disguised handwriting on the note, the faint limp from a twisted ankle that Muriel had glimpsed in the shadows. But beyond the mechanics of the crime lay the psychology, the deep-seated motives that drove a woman of poise and dignity to such an act. Eleanor Harrington had been the linchpin of her family, much like the matriarchs Miss Marple knew in St. Mary Mead. There was old Mrs. Edgeworth, for instance, who had ruled her household with an iron fist wrapped in velvet, concealing her son's embezzlement from the church fund until the scandal erupted at the harvest supper. Eleanor's protection of the family legacy mirrored that fierce maternal instinct, twisted by desperation. The emerald, that glittering symbol of heritage, had become a catalyst for her downfall. Thomas, the valet, with his quiet ambitions and growing greed, had threatened to shatter it, while exposing Sir Reginald's insurance fraud from the Indian plantation, Geoffrey's gambling debts that spiraled into blackmail, Victoria's illicit affair with the Parisian financier, and even Colonel Blakely's hidden addiction to laudanum. Miss Marple recalled the moment of revelation in the drawing-room, the air thick with accusation and denial. Eleanor's face, so composed throughout the ordeal, had finally cracked when confronted with the lavender trace on the safe's hinge. "I did it for them," she had whispered, her voice breaking. "Thomas would have ruined us, the debts, the scandals. The emerald was to be sold in the will, to settle everything, but he demanded it for himself. I couldn't let him. It was a motive as old as time, protection born of love, corrupted into violence." Miss Marple had seen it in the village too. Blacksmith's wife who had poisoned a rival suitor to safeguard her daughter's marriage, only to confess in the confessional booth. Human nature, she mused, was predictable in its unpredictability. People acted out of character precisely when their core values were threatened. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting a warm glow on the parlour's chintz, curtains and polished oak furniture. Miss Marple rose to tend her garden, her ritual for clearing the mind. The roses were in full flush, their petals unfurling like secrets revealed. As she pruned a wayward stem, she thought of Geoffrey Harrington, the prodigal son whose debts had entangled Thomas in the first place. Geoffrey's hot temper and financial recklessness had made him the obvious suspect, a red herring that Inspector Craddock had pursued with dogged determination. But Miss Marple had known from the start that his alibi, weak as it was, rang true. In its clumsiness, "I was in the library, alone," he had insisted, his fingers drumming restlessly. It reminded her of young Tommy Pierce, the baker's boy, always the first accused in village thefts, due to his shifty eyes, yet innocent as a lamb. Muriel, Geoffrey's wife, had been the emotional pivot, her false confession a desperate bid to shield her husband. "I struck him," she had sobbed, only for Miss Marple to dismantle it with the mismatch in handwriting. Muriel's nerves, frayed like an old hem, had been evident from the first. Her wide eyes, her twisted handkerchief, yet in her lie lay a truth, the depth of marital loyalty. Miss Marple admired it, recalling her own distant niece who had covered for her husband's indiscretions until the strain nearly broke her. Victoria Harrington, with her flame-red hair and Parisian flair, embodied the modern woman, ambitious, flirtatious, and entangled in webs of her own spinning. Her affair with the financier had been the spark for Thomas's possessiveness. The locket, inscribed with her hand, a token turned to torment. He grew too attached. Victoria had admitted, her voice laced with regret. Miss Marple saw parallels to the curate's daughter, who had run off to London with dreams of stage lights, only to return disillusioned. Victoria's path to redemption, severing ties and focusing on her designs, offered hope. A thread of renewal in the tapestry. Colonel Arthur Blakely, the blustery old soldier, had been a study in suppressed rage. His grudge over the failed plantation investment, compounded by Thomas's knowledge of his laudanum habit, had simmered like a pot left too long on the stove. War wounds, he had grumbled, clutching his flask. But Miss Marple had discerned the deeper wound, betrayal by a comrade. It echoed the feud between two retired majors in St. Mary Mead, who had quarrelled over a shared foxhunt mishap for decades, until a village mediation brought peace. The Colonel's reconciliation with Sir Reginald, settling accounts over brandy in the study, marked a turning point, pride yielding to pragmatism. Sir Reginald himself, the patriarch with his bristling moustache and booming voice, had been blind to the rot within his household. His announcement of the will changes at dinner had ignited the powder keg. Yet his denial of Thomas's blackmail had been genuine. "A Harrington doesn't bow," he had thundered. Miss Marple pitied him, seeing in him the archetype of the oblivious father, much like Mr. Fortescue in the village, who had ignored his daughter's elopement until it was front-page news in the local Gazette. And Agnes, the loyal housemaid, who had viewed Thomas as a son, her grief had been palpable, her whispers in the kitchen revealing fragments of the puzzle. "He changed, miss," she had said, polishing silver with vigor. Agnes's role had been peripheral, yet crucial. Her observations of Russell's and arguments had pinned the timeline. Miss Marple valued such figures, the unsung observers, like her own Florence, who noticed every visitor's shoeprint on the doormat. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lawn, Miss Marple returned indoors, her pruning shears set aside. The reflection extended to her own methods, the unassuming presence that invited confidences, the parallels drawn from village life that illuminated grander crimes. "It's all the same," she often said. "A manor or a cottage, greed, jealousy, fear drive us all." Dolly Bantry arrived for tea, her arrival heralded by the crunch of gravel under her sturdy shoes. Dolly, with her boundless energy and insatiable curiosity, was the perfect sounding board. "Jane, spill it all. The papers are full of it. Society lady slays valet in jewel heist, gone wrong. But I know there's more." Miss Marple poured the tea, her movements deliberate. "More indeed, Dolly. It wasn't a heist, but a desperate bid to preserve." Eleanor Harrington saw Thomas as a threat to everything she held dear. The emerald was the symbol, but the real treasure was her family's unity. Dolly leaned in, eyes wide, and the clues. That note about the cursed brilliant misdirection. "Yes," Miss Marple agreed, written in block letters, but the slant betrayed her hand, and the lavender, her signature scent, left on the safe. "Small things, Dolly, but they accumulate like snowflakes into an avalanche." They discussed the family at length. Geoffrey's vowed to reform, Muriel's newfound strength, Victoria's return to honest work, the Colonel's sobriety, Sir Reginald's humility. "Healing takes time," Miss Marple noted. "Like a garden after a storm, one must replant, nurture." Dolly shared village gossip. The vicar's jam scandal turned out to be a mislabeled entry. No foul play after all. "But you could have solved it in a trice, Jane," Miss Marple chuckled. "Perhaps, but let's leave some mysteries for the Fate Committee." As Dolly departed, the evening settled in, the cottage filled with the scent of wood smoke from the fire. Miss Marple picked up her knitting, the needles clicking in rhythm with her thoughts. The Harrington case had reaffirmed her philosophy. No coincidence, no luck, just keen observation of human behavior. The closed circle of suspects, the subtle clues, the logical reveal echoed the classics of detection she admired. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. It was the vicar, hat in hand, his face flushed. "Miss Marple, forgive the intrusion, but the church silveret's gone missing. Could you?" She smiled, setting her knitting aside. "Of course, vicar, let's have a look." As they walked to the church under the stars, Miss Marple reflected that life in St. Mary Mead was never dull. The emerald's enigma was but one thread in the vast fabric of mysteries, each teaching the same lesson: understand the heart, and the truth follows. The night air was crisp, carrying whispers of new puzzles. Miss Marple, with her unerring gaze, was ready. Chapter 11. The epilogue. The train from Ashford Cross to St. Mary Mead had carried Miss Jane Marple back to her quiet village life. The clatter of the rails a soothing counterpoint to the turmoil she had left behind at Harrington Manor. It was now a week since Lady Eleanor Harrington's arrest, and the crisp autumn air of St. Mary Mead held the promise of routine restored. Yet for Miss Marple, the echoes of the emerald's enigma lingered, like the scent of roses carried on a breeze. Her cottage, with its neat garden and familiar comforts, was a haven, but her mind, ever active, sifted through the case's intricacies, drawing parallels to the small dramas of village life that had always been her classroom. Settling into her parlour, Miss Marple arranged the late roses from Harrington Manor in a crystal vase, their fading petals a poignant reminder of the tragedy. Her knitting bag rested at her side, the needles poised to resume a lace shawl for the church bazaar. But for now, she chose a different task. Her journal, a small, leather-bound volume. It was where she recorded reflections on her cases, for publication, but for clarity, a way to untangle the threads of human nature that fascinated her. Dipping her pen into the inkwell, she began to write, her spidery script capturing the essence of the Harrington affair. The emerald's enigma, as I've come to call it, was not about the jewel itself, but the desires it mirrored: greed, pride, loyalty, all twisted into a deadly knot. Lady Eleanor, so poised, so resolute, saw herself as the guardian of her family's legacy, much like Mrs. Edgeworth in our village, who hid her son's thefts to preserve the family name. Eleanor's crime was no impulse. It was calculated, born of a mother's fierce love and a wife's silent fury. The lavender oil on her gloves, the note's disguised slant, the faint limp from a twisted ankle, these were the stitches I followed to the truth. She paused, her eyes drifting to the garden where the last dahlias stood defiant against the chill. The memory of the drawing-room confrontation flooded back, Eleanor's face, pale as porcelain, as Miss Marple laid out the clues. "You proposed a toast, Lady Eleanor," she had said, her voice gentle but unyielding. A moment of distraction, hands brushing, the key lifted from Sir Reginald's pocket. "You knew Thomas's blackmail threatened everything: the will, the emerald, the family's honor." Eleanor's collapse had been quiet, a single tear betraying her before she confessed. "He would have ruined us. I had no choice." Miss Marple resumed writing, her thoughts turning to the other players in the drama. Geoffrey Harrington, so like young Tommy Pierce here, with his reckless temper and debts, was the obvious suspector, red herring too blatant for the crime's precision. His watch, stopped at 10, was a clue to his innocence. A killer would not leave such a trail. Muriel, his wife, her nerves frayed like an old hem, tried to shield him with a false confession, her love echoing that of our vicar's sister, who once lied to protect her brother from scandal. Victoria, vibrant and flawed, carried the weight of her Parisian secrets, her locket a symbol of misplaced affection. Colonel Blakely's laudanum and old grudges mirrored our retired major's feud over a lost hunt, resolved only by truth. And Sir Reginald, blind to his household's rot, was not unlike Mr. Fortescue, who ignored his daughter's elopement until it was too late. The act of writing clarified her thoughts, as it always did. The Harrington case had been a closed circle, the manor a stage where motives: financial ruin, illicit love, bitter feuds played out like a Greek tragedy. The emerald, with its rumoured curse, had been the catalyst, but the true curse was secrecy, each family member hiding truths that festered until they spilled blood. Miss Marple set down her pen, her gaze resting on the roses. "Curses," she murmured, "are stories we tell to excuse our failings." A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. It was Dolly Bantry, her hat askew as always, her face alight with the prospect of gossip. "Jane, you're back at last. The village is buzzing. Mrs. Price swears you're a witch, and the vicar says you're a saint. Tell me everything about that manor." Miss Marple smiled, gesturing to the tea tray Florence had prepared. "Sit, Dolly. It's not witchcraft or sainthood, just noticing what others miss. Like your roses last summer, when you spotted the aphid before anyone else." Dolly laughed, settling into a chair. "Aphids and murderers, same thing, I suppose, to you. But how did you know it was Lady Eleanor?" The papers say it was her gloves. The gloves were part of it, Miss Marple said, pouring tea. Lavender, unique to her, left a trace on the safe's hinge. But it was more than Note's handwriting, disguised but with her characteristic slant, seen in her ledgers, and the limp Muriel saw, from Eleanor's ankle injury, noted by Agnes. Small things, Dolly, but they weave the truth. Dolly leaned forward, crumbs already dotting her blouse. And the family, are they crumbling like a bad scone? Not crumbling, Miss Marple replied, healing, slowly. I received a letter from Eleanor Shea, faces her trial with dignity, says the family is mending. Geoffrey and Muriel plan to farm, leaving the city's temptations. Victoria's ended her Paris affair, focusing on her designs. The Colonel and Sir Reginald have settled their accounts. No more grudges. Dolly's eyes widened, and the emerald donated to a museum, Miss Marple said. Its absence lifts a weight, like our church silver. When it was returned after the theft, less trouble out of sight. Their conversation drifted to village matters, the Fate Committee's jam scandal, now resolved as a labelling error, and the vicar's worry over missing hymnals, likely misplaced by the choir boys. Miss Marple listened, her mind drawing parallels. The village is a microcosm, she said. Every squabble, every secret, mirrors the grandest crimes. The Harringtons' greed and loyalty are no different from Mrs. Price's feud with the postmistress over a misdelivered parcel. As Dolly prattled on, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to the manor's pivotal moments. She recalled the dinner, the emerald gleaming on its velvet cushion as Sir Reginald toasted the future, unaware of the key slipping from his pocket. The search, with its flurry of alibis, Geoffrey in the library, Muriel's conservatory stroll, Victoria's powder room, the Colonel's kitchen patrol, Agnes's pantry rustle, all overlapping at 10:20, the critical window when Thomas met his fate, the terrace, bathed in moonlight, where Eleanor faced her valet, her hand steady as she struck, the note placed to mislead with talk of curses. Flashbacks played in her mind like scenes from a film. She saw Agnes's trembling hands as she reported, the open safe, her loyalty to the family warring with grief for Thomas, Victoria's flushed cheeks when the locket was revealed, her denial ringing hollow, the Colonel's defensive bluster, his flask a crutch for deeper wounds, Geoffrey's pacing, his anger masking fear, and Muriel, clutching her handkerchief, her false confession a cry for love. Miss Marple rose to fetch a shawl, the evening chill, creeping in. As she passed her writing desk, she opened her journal again, adding a new entry. The Harrington case teaches us that truth is both poison and cure. Eleanor's act was monstrous, yet born of a mother's heart. The others, Geoffrey, Muriel, Victoria, the Colonel, were complicit in their silence, each hiding sins that Thomas exploited. Yet in exposure, they found redemption. Like our village, where secrets spill at tea, truth heals when faced. The next day brought visitors, as St. Mary Mead's curiosity could not be contained. The vicar arrived first, his pince-nez glinting as he sought Miss Marple's counsel on the hymnals. I suspect young Tommy Pierce, he confided. He's been loitering near the vestry. Miss Marple smiled. Tommy's curious, not criminal. Check the organ loft, boys hide things there. Like the Harrington case, it's often the simplest explanation. Mrs. Price, the village gossip, followed, her basket of apples a pretext for questions. Miss Marple, they say you caught a killer with a glove. Is it true? Not quite, Miss Marple replied, accepting an apple. A glove was a clue, but it was human nature that betrayed the killer. Like your quarrel with the postmistress, signs reveal large truths. Mrs. Price huffed but left satisfied, promising to spread the tale. Miss Marple, alone again, walked to her garden, where the dahlias bowed under morning dew. She thought of Eleanor's letter, its quiet resignation. I acted to preserve, Eleanor had written, but destroyed instead. Your clarity saved us from further lies. The parallels to St. Mary Mead grew stronger. The village had its own secrets. The baker's apprentice who pilfered flour, caught by a stray crumb. The widow who forged a will, undone by a misspelled name. The curate's flirtation with a choir girl, exposed by a dropped hairpin. Each case, grand or small, followed the same pattern: motives rooted in human frailty, solved by noticing the overlooked dot by afternoon. Miss Marple visited the church, laying her Harrington roses on the altar as a quiet tribute. The vicar, retrieving the hymnals from the organ loft as predicted, thanked her profusely. You've a gift, Miss Marple, a detective's eye. "No gift," she said. "Just time and attention. Like pruning rosaceae, the pattern, cut the excess." Back at her cottage, she resumed her journal, reflecting on the psychological depth of the case. Eleanor's crime was not greed, but fear of losing control, of seeing her family fracture. Geoffrey's debts were a cry for validation. Victoria's affair, a search for freedom. The Colonel's addiction, a shield from pain. Thomas, poor boy, was the mirror, reflecting their flaws until one struck to shatter it. Dolly returned for supper, bringing a letter from Sir Reginald, forwarded through her. It was brief, thanking Miss Marple for her discretion and promising to visit St. Mary Mead to express gratitude in person. "The family is rebuilding," he wrote. "The emerald is gone, but our bonds endure." Over shepherd's pie, Dolly pressed for more. "Jane, what's next? Another manor, another murder?" Miss Marple laughed softly. "I hope not, Dolly, but life has a way of surprising in the village. There's always a puzzler, lost brooch, a whispered rumor. Each teaches us something." As night fell, the cottage glowed with lamplight, the fire crackling. Miss Marple's knitting resumed, each stitch a meditation on the case's lessons. No coincidence, no luck, just the patient unraveling of human hearts. The emerald's enigma was solved, its treacherous ties exposed, its hidden daggers laid bare. St. Mary Mead awaited its next story, and Miss Marple, with her quiet wisdom, was ready.